Hello. I am very delighted to be here. I'm Poetic Heretic, and today we are indeed resuming our analysis of The Unknown Reality, a Seth book by Jane Roberts. And yes, we're doing this on a Wednesday because I was unable to do this 2 days ago. So we're making up for lost time today. Wednesday, April 17th, 2019. So if you can just bear with me here, I'll get everything prepared. This is only our second stream analyzing this book. It's a new one, so that's very exciting. Can't wait to see what else it contains. I'm looking forward to exploring it immensely. As you can hear, the audio is working. So I did not read any more of it like last time. I did not read ahead. So we will indeed be discovering this entire upcoming area of it together. And so do remember, as always, that this is an analysis of this Seth book. This is not my just reading it the entire time. I will stop to comment occasionally, sometimes more than others. I'll have more of my analysis of the unknown, in quotes, reality. And indeed, as always, I want to say that these streams of mine are intended to be rather slow-paced and relaxed. If you're looking for something fast-paced, you should really look elsewhere. And I recommend that the viewer simply relax and enjoy the steady unfoldment of knowledge that we will be going over. So most of my time will be spent reading the material, but again, sometimes I will stop to comment, and I'll also answer any comments or questions that might pop up in the chat from time to time. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't in these streams. So we shall see any comments or questions on the material. I'll do my best to answer. And remember, this is an analysis of this Seth book. This is not my saying that I automatically agree with it or that you should automatically agree with it. It is an analysis. It does not mean that we necessarily agree with everything that is in the book. Always have to say that. Otherwise, people love to believe with stuff like this that you're like turning it into some kind of religion or something like that. And so I always reiterate now that that is not what is happening here, and I do not support that at all. I am an advocate for critical thinking. I am not an advocate for religious thinking in that way. So without further ado, well, actually, I will say one more thing before we get started. I am joined today by my new succulents, plants that are in my room, here in my office room, and they're very delightful. Maybe I'll show a picture of them later, or if you want to see a picture of them, you can go to my Twitter, twitter.com/poetic_heretic. There's a picture of them on there. And so this should be a most delightful stream indeed. My first live stream with them in the room. They're in the window. I can see them from my desk. So anyway, without further ado, let us begin. Session 680, February 6th, 1974, 9:21 p.m. Wednesday. In the last session, Seth began discussing separate photographs of Jane and me, brackets taken at the ages of 12 and 2, respectively, in connection with his ideas about probable selves. Since we wanted Seth to continue with the same material tonight, we looked the pictures over again while waiting for him to come through. Then, without greetings, now, when I speak of probable selves, of course I am not speaking of some symbolic portion of the personality structure, or using the idea of probabilities as an analogy. Consciousness underlined is composed of energy, with everything that implies. The psyche, then, can be thought of as a conglomeration of highly charged quote-unquote particles of energy, following rules and properties, many simply unknown to you. On other levels, laws of dynamics apply to the energy sources of the self. Think of a given self as a nucleus of an energy gestalt of consciousness. That nucleus, according to its intensity, will attract to it certain masses of the entire energy patterns available to a given identity. In those terms, the identity at birth is composed of a variety of such quote-unquote selves with their nuclei, and from that bank the physical personality has full freedom to draw. Rupert's mystical nature was such a strong portion of the entire identity that in his present reality, and in the probable reality chosen, as mentioned when I discussed this picture, parentheses, of Jane, the mystic impulses and expressions were given play. Intersections with probable realities occur when one psychic grouping intensifies to a certain point, so that fulfillment as a self results. Within the entire identity, there may be, for example, several incipient selves, around whose nuclei the physical personality can form. In many instances, one main personality is formed, and the incipient selves are drawn into it so that their abilities and interests become subsidiary, or remain largely latent. They are trace selves. On many occasions, however, such latent selves will be as highly energized as the quote-unquote main personality. Since physically a certain personality structure must be maintained, traces are made. Therefore, when such situations arise, one or two of the other energized selves will literally spring apart from the time-space structure that you know. From your viewpoint, these offshoots of energy become unreal. They exist as surely as you do, however. In terms of energy, this multiplication of selves is a natural principle. Parentheses, to me. Your quote-unquote sportsman self was never endowed with the same kind of force as that of your artistic or writing self. Footnote. See Appendix 2. End of footnote. It became subsidiary, yet present to be drawn upon, taking joy through your motion and adding its vitality to your quote-unquote main personality. Had it been given extra force through your environment, circumstances, or your own intent, then either your artistic self would have become subservient or complementary, or, if the energy selves were of nearly equal intensity, then one of them would have become an offshoot, propelled by its own need for fulfillment into a probable reality. Do you follow me? Parentheses. Yes. 944. Give us a moment. Your parents literally did not share the same reality at all. This is not as unusual as you may think. They met and related in a place underlined between each of their realities. It was not that they disagreed with each other's interpretation of events. The events underlined were different. The following paragraph, the Kindle app tells me, has been highlighted 151 times by different readers. In terms of energy, intent is stabilizing. There is a center to the self, again, that acts as a nucleus. The nucleus may change, but it will always be the center from which physical existence will radiate. Physically, intent or purpose forms that center, regardless of its reality in terms of energy. That is the end of the highlighted section. In your family life, in underlined this reality, your parents acted opacally to each other. There were strong energy shifts so that the personalities did not meet directly. Give us a moment. Some of this is difficult to explain. In a way, they were unfocused, yet each with strong abilities, but dispersed. There was a reason for this. They contained within themselves intense and yet blurred talents that were used as energy sources by the children. They came together precisely to give birth to the family, and for no other main reason as far as their joint reality was concerned. They seeded a generation, then. Footnote. See Note 9 for the last session. End of footnote. Your mother loved physical reality and took the greatest pleasure in its most minute aspects, for all of her complaints. Your father loved it but never trusted it. Each of your parents had their strongest reality, this time, and in your terms, in a probable system of reality, and underlined here, parentheses, in this reality, they were offshoots. To them, this system always seemed strange. Footnote. I think that as a child, I often sensed my parents' feelings of strangeness about this reality, although I was quite unable to express myself in those terms. Perhaps I'm reinterpreting old memories in the light of Seth's material here. Consciously, however, I knew nothing then about probable realities or the power of belief. I was just acutely aware of the unending differences of opinion between my mother and father, and of my unformed questions about the reasons for their behavior. At the same time, I saw them struggling to live like others I knew. I don't think I even discussed my confused feelings with my brothers as we grew older. On several occasions, Seth has given very blunt, very perceptive interpretations of the churning relationship involving my parents. That material is too long and complex to excerpt here, but I'd like to treat it separately sometime. End of footnote. In another system of reality, your father was, in fact, still is, a well-known inventor who never married but used his mechanically creative abilities to the fullest while avoiding emotional commitment. He met Stella, parentheses, my mother. They were going to be married, and in terms of years, the same years are involved historically. At one time, then, in your father's past, as you think of it, having met Stella, he did underlined not marry her after all. His love was for machinery, the speed of motorcycles, mixing creativity with metal. At that point of intersection, equal desires and intents within him became like twin nuclei. Whole regroupings of energy occurred, psychological and psychic implosions, so that two equally valid personalities were aware in a world in which only one could live at a time. By far, the creative, mechanically inventive personality began to outstrip the other. The father that you knew was the probable self, therefore. That probable self, however, dealt with emotional realities that the other avoided, and this was indeed his sole intent. Pause at 10:07. This does not mean that such a personality is limited, basically, or that he does not collect about him new interests and challenges, for he is himself mobile. He even has many of the characteristics of the other self, though these, of course, are latent. But through having children, your father brought about the birth of emotional existence, full-bodied and alive, in sons. Footnote. While dealing with emotional realities in this life, my father also exercised very considerable mechanical abilities. According to Seth's ideas, these would have represented bleed-throughs from his inventor, probable reality. End of footnote. This was a great fulfillment on his part, for the inventor did not trust himself to feel much emotion, much less give birth to emotional beings. In that other probability in which your parents originally met, your mother married a doctor, became a nurse, and helped her husband in his practice. She became an independent woman, and, again in your historical context, when it took some doing for a woman to distinguish herself. She had one son, then a hysterectomy on purpose. She schooled herself rigorously, moved in social circles, hid the unschooled, naive aspects of herself. In underlined that life, for example, She would certainly not wear red bows in her hair. All of the controlled energy made her somewhat bitter, though she was successful. She died in her 50s. Do you follow me? Parentheses, yes. Her energy was such that it spilled over into this system with your father, however. Someday I will try to explain this more clearly in terms of energy patterns. Historically, however, many probabilities exist at once. When your mother died in her 50s in one probable system, your mother in this system was the recipient of energy that then returned. Your father's greatest vitality was in the inventor's reality, and so in your terms this one suffered. This does not mean that each personality, regardless of probabilities, is not endowed with free will, and so forth. Each is born, in whatever system, from a source gestalt energy and develops. When your picture was taken, therefore, your parents were already living in a probable reality, but you and, brackets, your brother, Lyndon, were not. Now take your break. 1025. Jane's trance had been an excellent one. She said that while immersed in it, she thought the material, quote, fantastically complicated, like, where are you in all of this? Where's your soul? End quote. Some quick figuring showed us that the 50s for my mother had encompassed the years 1942 to 51. From my present viewpoint, I had no idea if she'd consciously or unconsciously experienced any influx of energy resulting from the death of a probable self during that decade. In those days, the Buttses didn't think in such terms, for one thing. For another, I was absent from the family home in Sayre for much of that time. In 1947, for example, when my mother was 55 years old, I was 28 and living in New York City. I wasn't to meet Jane for 5 years, and even if Stella Butts were still living, I think it would be difficult to question her about an event that would have taken place approximately a quarter of a century ago. I told Jane now that had my mother received any additional energy during her 50s, she might have expressed its benefits through the habitual mores of our society, in terms of changes rather than of probabilities, say, quote, my life changed for the better at that point when I made that decision, end quote. I added that perhaps the important thing for us now was to observe our unfolding lives with Seth's ideas of the larger or whole self in mind, and so achieve insights we could interpret in terms of probabilities. So we decided not to ask Seth to backtrack and give us material about the son my mother's probable self had had in her reality, even though that son was a probable self of mine. As we talked, Jane decided to go back into trance. She was getting so many bleed-throughs on the material herself that she was beginning to feel consciously confused. But Seth had all the data there, she said, if she had the time to give it. Resume at 10:45. Let me just take a sip of water here. Okay. Now, there are basically no limitations to the self, and all portions of the self are connected, so the probable selves are aware, unconsciously, of their relationships. Because no system is closed, there are flows of energy between them and interaction. Footnote. Seth has insisted from the very beginning of these sessions, late in 1963, that there are no closed systems, and in so doing has given us clues about his own ability to travel through at least some of them. End of footnote. Some of this is underlined exceedingly difficult to verbalize, since the word structure itself is not only serialized, but underlined particleized. Pause. You think of entities as particles, for example, rather than as waves of energy, aware and alert, or as patterns. A 1-minute pause. Think of Rupert's living area in Adventures, for example. Footnote. Jane is now working on the final draft of her own theoretical work on psychic matters, Adventures in Consciousness, and Introduction to Aspect Psychology. She started Adventures in July 1971 and has stayed with it through all of her other writing projects. It's first mentioned as Adventures in Consciousness in Chapter 21 of Seth Speaks, See the 587th session. In her glossary for adventures, Jane defines the living area as, quote, the quote-unquote paths our lives follow from birth to death, end quote, end of footnote. Imagine that at age 13, 3 strong energy centers come to the surface of the personality, highly charged, so that one person cannot adequately fulfill the desires or abilities presented. You may have a 3-way split at age 13. At brackets age 40, each of the 3 selves may recognize age 13 as a turning point and wonder what might have happened had they chosen other courses. None of this is predetermined. An offshoot probable self might leave your reality at age 13, say, but could intersect with you again at age 30 for a variety of reasons, where to underline you suddenly change a profession or become aware of a talent you thought you had forgotten, and find yourself developing it with amazing ease. Parentheses, to me again. Your birth, parentheses, in 1919, coincided with the birth of your mother's child in that other reality, hence her stronger feelings toward you. Your birth, and that of your youngest brother, parentheses, Richard, were highly charged for her. Yours for the reasons just given, and your brother's because it represented the time of your mother's hysterectomy in that other reality. In this reality, Richard's birth represented your father's final attempt to deal with emotional reality. Both of your parents imbued the third son with the strongest emotional qualities of their natures. Your mother had him defiantly, after the usual childbirth age, parentheses, she was 36, almost reacting against that, brackets, probable hysterectomy. In underlined this world, she could and would have another child. Lyndon was the one quote-unquote natural child of this marriage. Watch how you interpret that. But he was the child least affected by other realities. For that reason, however, and because of your parents' personalities here, the same amount of attention was not paid him psychically, and he felt that lack. 1102. Give us a moment. I told you, in the last session, that in one probability Rupert was a nun, expressing mysticism in a highly disciplined context, where it must be watched so that it does not get out of hand. Because there is an unconscious flow of information and experience here, you have one of the reasons for Rupert's caution in some psychic matters. Just making sure I said that correctly. And his fear of leading people astray. There were 3 offshoots. 1, the nun, with mysticism conventionally expressed, but under guarded circumstances. 1, the writer who veiled mystical experience through art, and 1, the Rupert you know, who experienced mystical experience directly, teaches others to do the same, and forms through writing a wedding of the 2 aspects. You have known 2 of those selves then, and you were presented at Rupert's birth with idea construction. Give us a moment. The birth of Joseph took place at York Beach with the dancing episode, so you have in your own experience examples in adult life. Footnote. Jane covers our York Beach dancing episode in Chapter 2 of the Seth material, and also quotes information Seth gave us on it in later sessions. The mystifying event took place during our vacation in York Beach, Maine in August 1963, a few months before Jane began to speak for Seth. At the time, we understood little of what happened, yet the event represented a key episode at the very beginning of our psychic education, for in a crowded, smoky hotel bar room, Jane and I unknowingly created physical, quote-unquote, personality fragments of ourselves, then came face-to-face with them. In the 9th session for December 18th, 1963, Seth explained what we had been up to and called our creations, quote, fragments of ourselves, thrown off materializations of your own negative and aggressive feelings, end quote. Parentheses, naturally, the more Seth told us about the human ability to generate such forms, the more questions we had, end of parentheses. In that 9th session, Seth also used his term, probable self, for the first time, end of footnote. I cannot give you everything in one evening, of course. A few glimpses before a word for Rupert. Sportsmen make good money, so for this and other reasons you early turned to commercial art, a field in which artistic ability would be well paid for. There were other connections, seemingly trivial yet pertinent. You enjoyed doing comics with outdoor scenes, animals in motion, the body performing. As an audience watches a sportsman perform, so those who read the comics watched your characters perform in action across the page. Or maybe that's supposed to say those who read the comics watched your characters perform in action across the page. All hidden patterns, yet each one making sense. I will go into the birth of Joseph. Now, however, a word to Rupert. 11:15. After giving 2 pages of material for Jane, here deleted, Seth closed out the session at 11:33 p.m. All right, and that is indeed the end of that session. So give me just one moment, and then we shall continue. Give us a moment, as Seth would say. All right. Continuing. Session 681, February 11th, 1974, 9:28 p.m. Monday. I'm just waiting, Jane said at 9:25 after we'd been sitting for the session since 9:10. Seth's around, I can tell. I was getting stuff earlier, but I'm just waiting until it's ready. I can feel concepts in my head, but they aren't clear yet, not the way they should be. It's as though Seth's going to have a hard time explaining them. End quote. Now, good evening. Good evening, Seth. And Rupert is correct, so give us a moment. What I am about to explain, underlined, is difficult. Purposely, it is not as yet in any of the books, simply because certain beliefs must be dispensed with before these ideas can be at all accepted. It is not that I am holding back so much as that, in your terms, what follows is dependent upon an understanding of concepts presented earlier. People who are still worrying about one's soul, gods, and devils must be helped to relate to greater realities from their own framework, and gently led away from it if possible. Probabilities have been mentioned in such a way that alternate realities are presented, showing such people that choices are available. The deeper explanations, however, demand a further expansion of ideas of consciousness, and a certain reorientation. It is extremely important that you bear in mind the importance of free will, and the presence of your own identity as you think of it. With that preamble, let me continue then. It is not so much a matter of Rupert's vocabulary, incidentally, since even a specialized scientific one would only present these ideas in its own distorted fashion. It is more a problem of basic language itself, as you are acquainted with it. Words do not exist, for example, for some of the ideas I hope to convey. We will, at any rate, begin. The Kindle app informs me that the following paragraph has 238 highlighters. All probable worlds exist now. All probable variations on the most minute aspect in any reality exist now. You weave in and out of probabilities constantly, picking and choosing as you go along. The cells within your body do the same thing. That is the end of the highlighted section. Slowly. I told you once that there were pulses of activity in which you blinked off and on, this applying even to atomic and subatomic particles. Footnote. In several of the sessions he delivered in 1970 to 71 for Seth Speaks, Seth explained how atoms and molecules phase in and out of our physical system. See especially the 567th session in Chapter 16. Quote, now the same sort of behavior occurs on a deep, basic, secret, and unexplored psychological level. End quote. Some of the probable systems arising out of such activity would be quite alien to us. Quote, one such fluctuation might take several thousand of your years, brackets, which would be experienced, say, as a second of your time. End quote. Jane elaborates upon related ideas from her own viewpoint in Chapter 10, among others, in her Adventures in Consciousness. End of footnote. Quote unquote, you assign as real, present here and now, only that activity that is your signal. Quote unquote, you are not aware of the others. When people think in terms of oneself, they of course identify with one body. You know that the cellular structure of it changes constantly. The body is, at any given moment, however, a mass conglomeration of energy formed from that rich bank of probable activity. The body is not stable in the terms usually thought of. On deeper biological levels, the cells underlined straddle probabilities and trigger responses. Consciousness rides upon and within the pulses mentioned earlier and forms its own organizations of identity. Each probability, probable only in relation to and from the standpoint of another probability, is inviolate, however, in that it is not destroyed. Once formed, the pattern will follow its own nature. A 1-minute pause at 9:50. Head bowed, eyes closed. The organizations of consciousness, quote unquote, grow even as cells grow into organs. Groups of probable selves then can and do form their own identity structure, which is quite aware of the probable selves involved. In your reality, experience is dependent upon time, but all experience is not so structured. There are, for example, parallel events that are followed as easily as you follow consecutive events. The structure of probabilities deals with parallel experience on all levels. Your consciousness picks and chooses to accept as real the results of, and ramifications of, only certain overall purposes, desires, or intents. You follow these through a time structure. Your focus allows other just as legitimate experience to become invisible or unfelt. In the same way that you latch upon one personal biological history, you latch upon but one mass underlined Earth history. Others go on about you all the time, and other probable selves of your own experience their quote-unquote histories parallel to yours. In underlined practical terms of sense data, those worlds do not meet. In deeper terms, they coincide. Any of the infinite number of events that could have happened to you in Rupert, brackets, do happen. Your attention span simply does not include such activity. 10 o'clock. Such endless creativity can seem so dazzling that the individual would appear lost within it, yet consciousness forms its own organizations and psychic interactions at all levels. Footnote. Long before this, Seth was concerned that Jane said I might feel insignificant once we attempted to grasp the endless ramifications of consciousness as he was explaining them to us. As he said in the 29th session for February 26, 1964, quote, later I will attempt to show you where the boundaries are, though, with a laugh, there really are no boundaries that form a variety of such planes, brackets, realities, into a sphere of relation in which, to some extent, cause and effect operates as you understand it. Beyond that, for a long time, there will be no need for me to go any more deeply. I will speak of the entity, the personalities, the reincarnations, the diverse personality fragment groupings, the planes with which you are similar or can understand, and ultimately try to deal with your questions, implied if not spoken, as to where entities come from to begin with. End of footnote. Any consciousness automatically tries to express itself in all probable directions, and does so. In so doing, it will experience all that is through its own being, though interpreted, of course, through that familiar reality of its own. You grow probable selves as a flower grows petals. Each probable self, however, will follow through in its own reality. That is, it will experience to the fullest those dimensions inherent to it. You pick and choose one birth and one death in your terms. Parentheses, to me. You died as a young boy in an operation, however, in this life as you think of it. You died again in the war, where you were a pilot, but those are not your official deaths, so you do not recognize them. Footnote. According to Seth, then, in one probability, I failed to survive the operation I underwent for appendicitis in this reality when I was 11 years old. My second probable death took place sometime during the years of my military service, 1943 to 46, in World War II. It's interesting to note that Seth says I was a pilot and hence an officer in that probability. In the reality I know, I served in the ATC, the Air Transport Command, as an aircraft instrument specialist and mechanic, with the rank of staff sergeant. While on duty in some of the remote islands of the Pacific, however, I managed to get in some flying time, though not as a pilot. End of footnote. By the way, I will say here, if anyone finds the note system here distracting, the various footnotes that are basically the notes that Rob is inserting into the material, do let me know, particularly in the chat on one of these live streams. It could even be a different kind of live stream. You could just let me know real quick. Or if anyone has feedback on that, whether you like my reading it as we go or you don't like it, because basically if you guys did not prefer it this way, we could always just save the reading of such material, these footnotes or notes or whatever. We could save that for the end of the chapter where they are presented again. And we could just stick with basically what Seth is saying, with, I guess, the only exception being when there are, other kinds of footnotes that aren't like Rob's notes. I hope that makes sense. Which are pretty rare though. So if anyone has feedback on that, like if that's distracting for you guys that watch this either live or when it's not live, let me know, because I can just change the modality. If enough people are like, yeah, that's distracting, then we'll change it to the other way. We'll just read it at the end of each session. So do let me know if you have any feedback on that. Thank you. My plants are looking very happy over there. All right, so continuing. Science likes to think that it deals with predictable action. It perceives such a small amount of data, however, and in such a limited area, that the great inner underlined unpredictability of any molecule, atom, or wave is not apparent. Scientists perceive only what appears within your system, and underlined that often appears predictable. Give us a moment. True order and organization, even of biological structure, can be achieved only by granting a basic unpredictability. I am aware that this sounds startling. Underlined basically, however, the motion of any wave or particle or entity is unpredictable, freewheeling, and undetermined. Your life structure is a result of that unpredictability. Your psychological structure is also. However, because you are presented with a fairly cohesive picture in which certain laws seem to apply, you think that the laws come first and physical reality follows. Instead, the cohesive picture is the result of the unpredictable nature that is and must be basic to all energy. Statistics provide an artificial, predetermined framework in which your reality is then examined. Mathematics is a theoretical organized structure that of itself imposes your ideas of order and predictability. Statistically, the position of an atom can be theorized, underlined, but no one knows where any given atom is at any given time. Footnote. I thought that in his last sentence especially, Seth was flirting with the principle of uncertainty, or indeterminacy, as postulated in 1927 by the German physicist Werner Heisenberg. In quantum mechanics, this axiom maintains that it's not possible to simultaneously ascertain the momentum and position of a subatomic wave particle like an electron, say, electrons being one of the qualities that make up atoms. The day after this session was held, I asked Jane if she'd heard of Heisenberg. She hadn't, nor did she understand his work, as best I could explain it to her. End of footnote. Except let me analyze this a bit more. I wonder if I said that correctly. Indeterminacy, and maybe it's Werner Heisenberg. I bet that's how you say that name. Let's see if I can find out real quick. Hang on. Weird. It's like the other features do not work for footnotes, I guess. Oh well. I suppose it's not a big enough deal to take that any further. (1022). You are examining probable atoms. You are composed of probable atoms. A 1-minute pause. Give us a moment. A 1-minute pause. Consciousness, to be fully free, had to be endowed with unpredictability. All that is had to surprise himself, itself, herself, constantly, through freely underlined, granting itself its own freedom, or forever repeat itself. This basic unpredictability then follows through on all levels of consciousness and being. A certain cellular structure may seem inevitable within its own frame of reference only because opposing or contradictory probabilities do not appear therein. In underlined your terms, consciousness is able to hold its own sense of identity by accepting one probability, one physical life, for example, and maintaining its identity through a lifetime. Even then, certain events will be remembered and others forgotten. The consciousness also learns to handle alternate moments as it, quote-unquote, matures. As it does so mature, it forms a new, larger framework of identity, as the cell forms into an organ on another level. You know, it's interesting reading what Seth is saying here and having my plants over there, my new plants, because it just, the way that Seth is describing the way that like probabilities grow out of our consciousness and stuff like that, and you know, all this stuff is reminding me of like the way that these plants grow, that like one new leaf or petal or whatever after another just unfolds from the rest, as I've been studying them in recent days, the past couple of days. Like, it's funny. Like, I get this intuitive feeling that there's a deep, strong connection there, that they're operating on some kind of similar principle or something. I don't know. It's hard to put this feeling into words, but something like that. In your terms, the phrase is I misspoke. Let's do that again. In your terms, the phrase is necessary. The moment point, the present, is the point of interaction between all existences and reality. Footnote. Seth's concept of the moment point is implicit in his material as I quote it in Note 1 for this session. Also see the 514th session in Chapter 2 of Seth Speaks, and the 668th session in Chapter 19 of Personal Reality. End of footnote. And this would be a good moment to also mention, for those who may be unaware or have forgotten, I have playlists of the streams that I did reading and analyzing both of those books on my YouTube channel. So if you ever want to check out those references to a certain session or chapter or whatever, in either of those books, Seth Speaks or The Nature of Personal Reality, just go to my YouTube channel, find those playlists, and go to the appropriate chapter or session or whatever. All right, so continuing. All probabilities flow through it, though one of your moment points may be experienced as underlined centuries or as a breath in other probable realities of which you are a part. Pause at 10:36. Rupert is at this moment feeling massive. Footnote. See Appendix 3. End of footnote. He is experiencing several things. The intercellular body consciousness feels itself massive, while to you cells are minute. The sounds of the package, for example, parentheses, as Seth, Jane crumpled an empty cigarette package, or the fingernails across the table, parentheses, demonstrated, are magnified, for in the cellular world they are an important outside-the-self cosmic event, messages of great importance. The cellular consciousness experiences itself as eternal, though to you the cells have a brief life. But those cells are aware of the body's history, in your terms, and in a much more familiar fashion than you are aware of the Earth's history. The cells are also aware of probabilities in a more familiar fashion than you are, as they manipulate the past and future history of the body. Rupert now, again, is experiencing massiveness, as in your idea of probabilities the cellular structure feels its vast endurance. Working with events not even real to you, it produces a physical structure that maintains identity, underlined, and predictability out of a vastly creative network. That network, underlined, is unpredictable, yet from it Rupert can predictably put ashes into that shell. Parentheses. Jane held up her favorite ashtray, the abalone shell we'd found in Baja California in 1958, and tapped some ashes into it from her cigarette. End of parentheses. The predictability of that gesture rests upon the basis of an unpredictability in which multitudinous other actions could have occurred, and in other realities do occur. 10:46. You had better give us a moment and rest your hand. Jane had been speaking steadily in trance, if with many pauses, for 78 minutes. Now she still sat upright in her chair, sipping beer, eyes closed. A minute passed. As long as a minute is passing in the book, I need to take, less than a minute and turn down my heater. One moment. It has warmed up in here quite fast. Probably largely as a result of the steadily increasing temperatures now here in the heart of April. Let's see here. Continuing. Now, the Kindle app is notifying me that the following sentence has 223 highlighters. Your beliefs and intents cause you to pick from an unpredictable group of actions those that you want to happen. Your beliefs and intents cause you to pick from an unpredictable group of actions those that you want to happen. Interesting. You experience those events, parentheses, to me, quote unquote, your desire to live straddled the death of the child in an operation. The child's desire to die chose that event. People are as free as atoms are. Give us a moment. In no way could you predict what would happen to the child in that photograph of yourself. Footnote. Seth referred to the photograph my father had taken of me when I was about 2 years old. See the appropriate note at the beginning of the 679th session. End of footnote. In no way now can you quote-unquote predict what will happen to you now. You can choose to accept as your reality any number of given unpredictable events. In that respect, the choice is yours, but all the events you do underlined not except occur nevertheless. In a very small measure, you can see how this works when you think of your mother in, say, her last years, and compare your idea of her with those of brackets your brothers, Lyndon and Richard. She was a different person to each of you. She was underlined herself, but in the interweavings of probabilities, while certain agreed upon historic events were accepted, she admitted into her reality whatever portions of underlined your probable reality she chose. Each of you had a different mother. Probabilities intersect then in your experience, and their intersection you call reality. Biologically and psychically, these are underlined intersections, coming togethers, consciousness adopting a focus. Again, Rupert is still experiencing massiveness. All of the atoms and molecules that have composed your body since your birth, and will compose it until your death, in your terms, exist now. So even your knowledge of the body is experienced in a time form, that is, bit by bit. Long pause at 11:05. Part of Rupert's feeling of massiveness comes from the mass experience of the body, existing all at once. Therefore, to him, the body feels underlined larger. Calculations impossible to describe occur, so that from this basic unpredictability, you experience what seem to be predictable actions. This is only because you focus upon those actions that, quote unquote, make sense in your reality and ignore all others. I am not speaking symbolically, of course, when I say you died as a youngster, nor was any harsh reality forced upon the mother by the dying child, for underlined that portion of your mother was the part that regretted having had the child. Now, underlined, atoms can move in more directions than one at once. Footnote. As an artist, my intuitive reaction to Seth's remark that an atom can move in more than one direction at once was to associate that ability with his notions of simultaneous time and probabilities. The artist, since he isn't any kind of scientist, parentheses, even though he might be interested in science in general, attempts to grapple with the statement as best he can, in light of the feeling he has for what Seth is trying to say. At the same time, he realizes that from his artistic viewpoint, he may not be able to understand the paradox of quote-unquote contradictory motions. End of footnote. You only perceive scientifically the probable motion you are interested in. The same applies to subjective experience. Now, take your break. 11:10. Jane slowly came out of one of her longest session trances. She'd been under for an hour and 42 minutes. I've indicated but a few of the many long pauses she took. She still felt massive. Her eyes rolled up, then closed again. Things are really weird, like the sky's cracking. Seth talking about it sort of controlled things, but now my head's getting really big. End quote. I roused her with a call, and she said, "Yeah, it's wild. I don't know whether I should break it or go along with it. I feel like my head is real big now, and going around to the right and spinning. It's huge." And I think the sun is maybe trying to come out there. I'm not sure. 11:15. And when there isn't any sound outside, everything's ringing, the way your ears do, only more so. Now my whole body's really big, massive. I might end it. It's funny. It's not terribly pleasant. My teeth seem really huge. Everything. My feet. 11:17. Jane smiled as I called her again. I just got the image of being a giant in a giant room. Then something I don't understand. An image of myself as a gorilla, or something like that. I'm as tall as the ceiling, trying to knock the walls down. I'm not understanding what's going on very well. Now I'm getting bigger. I think I'm going to come out of it. My face isn't doing anything, is it? Changing in any way? And then Rob says to her, "No." 11:21. I had the feeling of my hair being long and parted in the middle, as though I've got some kind of humanoid features, you know, with the hair hanging down on each side of my face, which is something like an animal's, but with very intelligent eyes, very warm and soft. Footnote. Jane's assertion tonight that she felt a humanoid aspect of herself reminded me of the material she'd given almost a year ago in Chapter 12 of Personal Reality on, quote, the idea of natural therapy in animals, end quote, and animal medicine men. She came up with that information on her own, too, and during a session break. On that occasion, she was more of an observer. There is quite a difference in, quote unquote, physical size between the images she had seen then and her visions of herself this evening. Yet there were similarities also, for of that earlier experience she said, quote, I saw creatures who walked upright, hairy, with brilliant, compassionate eyes, end quote. See the 648th session at 11:30. End of footnote. Jane finally opened her eyes. Her ears still rang so loudly that she asked me if I heard the same sound. I told her I didn't. We walked around the room. I made her half a sandwich. It's sort of frustrating, she said. It's as though I'm seeing or feeling what I'm capable of at the moment, but I know there's more there behind that. I can feel it, but I can't get it out. As she ate, Jane said, the noises in my mouth are real loud. You're not used to it. When she sipped beer, she felt the cold liquid descend inside her body, but displaced to the right of her esophagus. She recited a list of opposing feelings in her own body that she was simultaneously aware of in her quote-unquote bigger body. Her right foot was very cold, her back very hot. I got her a sweater, for our living room had cooled off. The February night was very cold. Resume, finally, at 11:47. Now, only out of unpredictability can an infinite number of underlined orders or underlined ordered systems arise. Anything less than complete unpredictability will ultimately result in stagnation, or orders of existence that in the long run are self-defeating. Only from unpredictability can any system emerge that can be predictable within itself. Only within complete freedom of motion is any quote-unquote ordered motion truly possible. From the quote-unquote chaotic bed of your dreams springs your ordered daily organized action. In underlined your reality, the behavior of your consciousness and of your molecules are highly connected. Your type of consciousness presupposes a molecular consciousness, and your kind of consciousness is inherent in molecular consciousness, inherent within your system, but not basically predictable. Predictability is simply another word for significance. Unpredictability, looking at itself in a variety of different fashions, finds certain portions of itself significant and forms certain orders or ordered sequences about itself. In one of our very early sessions, I told you that you perceive from a vast field only certain data that you find meaningful. That data could only arise from the bed of unpredictability. Only unpredictability can provide the greatest source of probable orders. Your cells are quite able to handle different orders of events, therefore in the dream state they are able, in their individual ways, to perceive your experience, and from it, to choose those actualities you want made underlined real in your terms. In dreams you are acquainted with probable events, from which you then choose, parentheses, to me. So before you died as a child, you knew that you could pick or choose that death. In greater terms, you chose both life and death, and the picture of you at the age of 16 was never taken in one reality. Footnote. On facing pages in our album, Jane and I have a pair of large, rather formal photographs of ourselves that we've often joked about. As it happened, we looked at them earlier this evening. Both of them were taken in 1936. Jane, in her photograph, is 6.5 years old. I'm 16 in mine, and 1 year short of finishing high school. More than once, Jane has asked me what I'd have thought at that age had I been aware that my wife-to-be was a round-faced little kid still playing with paper dolls. And that's in quotes, round-faced little kid still playing with paper dolls. End of footnote. Pause. We have quite all that Rupert can handle this evening, and this is a beginning. Parentheses. Now Seth came through with half a page of material for Jane, then wound up the evening's work with this joking comment. His probable brain can translate only so much of this at one time. Parentheses. Yes. Good night. 12:06 a.m. Jane still felt somewhat massive, a few notes added the next day. She slept restlessly and found herself, quote, giving material on probabilities just about all night, end quote. She woke up often, and at such times was relieved to discover that she hadn't been holding a session that I wasn't recording. As it was, she laughed, the material was still, quote unquote, safe. We'd get it at a regular session. Jane has often told me that usually on such nighttime occasions, she doesn't feel Seth's presence or hear his voice. Instead, she's just aware of the material, quote unquote, running through her. All right, and that concludes that session. So it looks like we'll be going right on into the next one very soon here. Oh, wow. Jeez, I needed to stretch. It also looks like I'll be changing the title for this stream because I didn't realize we'd be getting to a third session. We will be, but I am going to take just a brief moment to sort of recover and then continue. I feel like my strength and stamina, these streams and reading and everything, isn't quite at its highest point today, unfortunately. That's most likely due to, well, I think how much I've had to push myself over the past couple of days. But that's okay. I will recover soon enough. So this is interesting stuff that Seth is going over, I do think. Talking about probabilities and a lot of it in connection with how it relates to their personal lives. Find it quite interesting. Because, of course, again, as I mentioned, I'm reading this for the first time myself as well as we proceed here. And for anyone wondering, if it seems like Seth is spending a lot of time on like the same sort of material, don't worry. As you might recall from the beginning of this book, when I read the con section, he definitely gets into all sorts of other subjects throughout this book. Also, I need to turn my heater down yet again because it's still too warm in here. Wow. There. Actually, I just turned it completely off because I already had it down so low anyway. Oh boy, earlier it was like exact opposite. It's like it's hard to get it warm in here. Now it's like way too warm. Twitch requires an update. Well, no one has time for that. Twitch and Twitter, something always requires an update. Why can't they just update automatically like other apps? But anyway, whatever. All right, so just take another sip of water. And let us continue. It says this chapter should take about 31 minutes to read, or this session chapter, whatever. And then so once we complete that, that'll probably be it for this stream. Though I may come back after lunch to read and analyze some more, since it's been rather short. All right, so anyway, session 682, February 13th, 1974, 9:27 p.m., Wednesday. Quote, I think Seth's heading towards something new, Jane said at 9:20 as we sat waiting for the session. Funny. Not that we're going to come up with new words, but some new ideas. I feel like I've had 3 or 4 drinks, or as though I'm in a different state of consciousness already, and here I haven't had anything except this apricot juice. End quote. Indeed, we were out of beer, which Jane usually drinks during the sessions, and she didn't want any wine. I feel him, Seth, around now, she said. But it's like last time. I'm getting stuff, but I'm waiting until it's clear. I don't really feel looped, but the center of focus I always use in the session seems strange. There's an unfamiliarity about finding it. I'd say, although I don't know, that I'm already in a deeper state than usual. End quote. A note. The night was very warm and followed a series of really cold ones through most of this month. Much snow had melted today. The change in the weather was quite exhilarating. I think I'm going to switch arms real quick. Okay. Now, good evening. Good evening, Seth. Pause. The Nature of Personal Reality is an excellent handbook, one that will enable people to manipulate in the world they know with greater effectiveness. Footnote. Seth finished dictating Personal Reality in July 1973, but it took me until November to complete my notes for it and type the finished manuscript. Prentice Hall will publish it in July 1974. Jane and I still have to correct page proofs for the book, however. They're due from the printer next month. End of footnote. It will not matter whether or not they understand deeper issues upon which the whole nature of underlined physical reality itself depends. The material I am giving now will attempt some explanation of those deeper issues. Rupert's own development makes this possible, for it was necessary that he progress to the point that he has in adventures and reach the level of certain theories so that these could be used as springboards. Footnote. See Note 5 for Session 680. End of footnote. Give us a moment. We must unfortunately often deal with analogies because they can form bridgeworks between concepts. There are units of consciousness, then, as there are units of matter. Footnote. A note added later. Of course, as soon as Seth mentioned units of consciousness in unknown reality, I thought of the electromagnetic energy units, parentheses, EE units, as he called them, that he discussed in 1969 and 1971. See sessions 504 through 506 in the appendix of the Seth material, and the 581st session in Chapter 20 of Seth Speaks, respectively. In the latter material, he used several evocative analogies to describe his EE units. Quote, basically emanations rising from consciousness, the invisible breath of consciousness. The emanations are actually emotional tones. The units are just beneath the range of physical matter. End quote. End of footnote. We must... Oh, I'd already read that, I think. Okay. I do not want you to think of these units as particles. There is a basic unit of consciousness that, expressed, will not be broken down, as once it was thought that an atom was the smallest unit and could not be broken down. The basic unit of consciousness, obviously, is not physical. It contains within itself innately infinite properties of expansion, development, and organization, yet within itself always maintains the kernel of its own individuality. Despite whatever organizations it becomes part of, or how it mixes with other such basic units, its own identity is not annihilated. It is aware energy, identified within itself as itself, not quote-unquote personified, but underlined awareized. It is therefore the source of all other kinds of consciousness, and the varieties of its activity are infinite. It combines with others of its kind, forming then units of consciousness, as mentioned often, atoms and molecules combine. This basic unit is endowed with unpredictability. That very unpredictability allows for infinite patterns and fulfillments. The word soul, unfortunately, has been so used in regard to your species that it becomes highly difficult to unravel the conceptual difficulties. Using usual definitions, you would call a soul the result of a certain organization of such units, which you would then recognize as a quote-unquote soul. 947. That leads to the old inevitable questions: do animals have souls, or do trees or rocks? In line with the usual definition, then, in your terms, this smallest unit would be quote-unquote soul stuff. That viewpoint, however, is highly limited, for quote-unquote above you, using that scale, there are other more developed organizations of these units, and so from underlined that quote-unquote more exalted viewpoint, underlined you would seem to be junior souls indeed. So I prefer, here at least, to speak of these units of consciousness instead. Long pause. Their nature is the vitalizing force behind everything in your physical universe, and others. Geez, where'd that cough come from? Their nature is the vitalizing force behind everything in your physical universe, and others as well. These units can indeed appear in several places at once, and without going through space, in your terms. Literally now, these basic units of consciousness can be in all places at once. They are in all places at once. They will not be recognized because they will always appear as something else. Of course, they move faster than light. There are millions of them in one atom, many millions. Each of these units is aware of the reality of all others, and influences all others. In your terms, these units can move forward or backward in time, but they can also move into thresholds of time with which you are not familiar. Footnote. Again, see the 581st session in Chapter 20 of Seth Speaks for material on EE units and postulated faster-than-light particles like the tachyon. Parentheses, it's been stated in theory, incidentally, that although tachyons themselves travel faster than light, their radiation doesn't. This radiation, then, the carrier of all of the information we could gather about tachyons, brackets, or similar particles, would be observable by us. End of footnote. All probabilities are probed and experienced, and all possible universes created from these units. Therefore, there are realities in which the endless probabilities of underlined one given event are probed, and all experience grouped about that venture. There are systems in which a moment, from your standpoint, is made to endure for the life of a universe. Footnote. See notes 1 and 5 for the 681st session. End of footnote. I do not mean that a moment is simply underlined stretched, or that time is slowed down alone, but that all the experiences possible within a moment become realities within that framework. Such systems have little to do with you in any practical manner, nor is such information given to dwarf your idea of what your own consciousness is. It is important, however, that you realize the fact that there is more creativity and variety in an inner reality than you ever physically perceive. 1006. These units of consciousness do not have human characteristics, of course. They do, however, possess their own quote-unquote inclinations, leanings, propensities, and perhaps propensities comes closest to the term I want. I do not want you to think of them as miniature people. Nevertheless, neither are they clumps of quote-unquote idle energy. They are vitalized, aware, charged with all of the qualifications of being. Damn. My fatigue is getting to me a bit. These past couple of days were intense, so I apologize. All psychological structures then are composed of such organizations, however long or short lived in your terms. They are innately endowed with the desire or propensity for growth in creative organization. They are not found alone, then, in isolation. Since these units of consciousness exist at once, they are aware of all the organized self structures of which they are a part. To this extent, all probable realities are connected in that basic manner. These units grow out of themselves. Since I have told you that in your terms your past, present, and future exist at once, these units are constantly emerging out of your underlined now point from both the future and the past. Long pause, one of many. I do not want to ruin your idea of stability, and I do not want to confuse you. The fact remains that in speaking of probabilities thus far, I have simplified the issues considerably. Parentheses, to me. I said, for example, that you died as a child in one probability, and again in the parentheses, military service. And I gave you a small sample of your parents' probable history. Parentheses, see the last two sessions. In doing so, I used ideas and terms quite easily grasped. The larger picture is somewhat more difficult, by far, to express. 1021. Are you saying that you have to keep things that simple for us? I asked. Wait, let me reread that with the correct inflection. Are you saying that you have to keep things that simple for us? I asked. I am saying that I am now ready to lead you beyond those necessary preliminaries. All matter is based upon the units mentioned, with their unpredictability and their propensity for exploring all probabilities. Even your atomic structure, then, is poised between probabilities. If this is true, then obviously, quote unquote, you are aware of only one small probable portion of yourself. Underlined, and this portion you protect as your identity. Parentheses, underlined. If you think of it as simply a focus taken by, quote unquote, your greater identity, then you will be able to follow what I am saying without feeling puny by contrast or lost. Footnote. For the second time in the session, Seth referred to the chance that the individual might feel insignificant within the enormous reaches of the inner universe. He also mentioned such a possibility in the 681st session at 10 o'clock. See Note 2 for that session as well. I find Seth's discussions about probabilities most intriguing and sense no physical or emotional threat. Jane feels the same way. Quote, my concern, when I'm aware of it, is for the readers, she told me after the session. I don't want any of them to feel swept away. End quote. End of footnote. Sending energetic vibes. Thanks for these as always. Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much. And I send energetic vibes to you as well. And you are very welcome. The focus that you have is indeed inviolate. I have often said that even in your lifetimes, all probable variations of any one event occur, but I never went much further. With your focus, it seems that you have a underlined line of identity from birth to death. Looking back at any point, you are sure that the quote-unquote self of 10 years ago is the self of today, though perhaps changed in certain respects. There is, of course, no single line kind of development at all. In the first place, as you know, your life is at once, though you experience practically a life-to-death sequence. Rupert's living area in Adventures. Footnote. See Note 5 for session 680. End of footnote. Every probable event that could happen to you happens. I gave you one or two small examples of your mother's probable existences. Think in physical terms of the generations going out from one seed into the ages. Now, your self-reality in any given moment is like that seed, following probable generations that appear in other dimensions as well as this one. In each now moment, you draw from the vast bank of unpredictable actions certain ones that are quote-unquote significant to you, and your private idea of significance will result in what then seems to be predictable action. 1036. Propensity is a selection of significance, an inclination toward the formation of selected experience. This applies on all levels, atomic and psychological, and to biological stimulus and mental intent. These basic units move toward organizations then of a selective nature. Having an unpredictable field to draw from, they select activity according to those significances. Period. Various kinds of significances are the result of the unit's individual natures. The body that you have is a probable body. It is the result of one line of quote unquote development that could be taken by your particular earth personality in flesh. All of the other possible lines of development also occur, however. They occur at once, but each one simultaneously affects every other. There is actually far greater interaction here than you realize, because you are not used to looking for it. The harder you work to maintain the underlined official accepted idea of the self in conventional terms, the more, of course, you block out any kind of unpredictability. Because of the great organizing nature of these basic units, there are also psychological structures that are quite capable of holding their own identities while being aware of any given number of probable selves. Life after death has great meaning in your reality, because death is a part of it. Your greater reality obviously transcends both your births and your deaths. Underlined, the idea of one universe alone is basically nonsensical. Your reality must be seen in its relationship to others. Footnote. It may not be so easy to see our reality in relation to others, though. See Note 1 for Appendix 3. End of footnote. Otherwise, you are always caught in questions like, how did the universe begin? Or, when will it end? All systems are constantly being created. Only in a context of probabilities can immortality make any sense. Heredity springs from the great inherent unpredictability that is then broken down to specifications inside the chromosomes, no two of which are alike. Footnote. Chromosomes are microscopic bodies into which the protoplasmic substance of a cell nucleus separates during cell division. They carry the genes, the factors or units, quote-unquote blueprints, that determine hereditary characteristics. End of footnote. The Kindle app is informing me that the following 2 sentences have been highlighted 170 times. What you think of as daily life is then a focus upon certain probable events above others, a choosing of significances, a selection of pattern. Other portions of the self follow different selections. Now you may take your break. 10:55. Jane was quickly out of another good trance. Once again, it had been a long one. Her delivery had been fast at times. I knew what I was saying when I said it, but I've forgotten it all now. She paused, then continued in a way I thought somewhat unusual for her. We're doing the best we can with what abilities we've got. You wonder what this material's application is. What good does it do to know it? If you can't tell, that was in quotes. That was Jane saying that. Well, I said, once it's incorporated into your consciousness, you'll put it to use like you would any other information. It certainly enlarged my own ideas of what human beings are all about, for instance, their motivations, their behavior. End quote. Jane wondered how tonight's material applied to my mother, brackets, who had died 3 months ago. Quote, to Mom Butts herself, not just the theory of it, is she in another probability now? I'd say the part of her that was close to us is, but that part may be resting there, too. For reasons too personal to go into here, we haven't yet tried to, quote-unquote, tune into my mother in her new environment. I suggested that the rest of the session be devoted to Jane herself, but Seth had other ideas. Resume at 11:15. Let me take a sip of water. Now, because your greater identity is aware of its probable existences, you are in matter and out of it at the same time. in time and out of it. You have a greater identity outside of your context, yet a part of it is underlined inside your context as underlined you. Your you-ness is your significance, a focus of awareness, conscious of itself, that seeks out and views experience with its own unique propensities. The existence of probable realities and probable selves in no way denies the validity of your own experience or individuality. That rides secure, underlined choosing from unpredictable fields of actuality, those that suit its own particular nature. With gestures, emphatically, that selfhood jumps in leapfrog fashion over events that it does not want to actualize, pause, and does not admit such experience into its selfhood. Other portions of your greater identity, however, do accept those same events rejected by you and form their own selfhoods. Now, some of you might choose some of the same events, and their probabilities will merge. Such points of intersection are highly charged and creative. These intersections can happen in individual and mass terms. One historical event may be simultaneously accepted in several probable realities, for example, while others may occur in one and not in an alternate history. Long pause at 11:29. While words are difficult to use here, again, what I am saying applies, in different ways perhaps, to the behavior of worlds, atoms, and psychological structures. Give us a moment. In the life that you know, as given in personal reality, your beliefs act to specify the particular probable events that will become quote-unquote real. Footnote. Much of personal reality contains material on beliefs, of course. See chapters 14 and 15, among others. Seth's information on quote-unquote the point of power, given in the 657th session in chapter 15, is especially appropriate here. End of footnote. Because you are a probable self, an understanding of your own nature will show you some of the abilities, not used here, but present, that you can indeed choose to actualize. You can draw then from your own bank of probable abilities, for there will be traces of them in you. They are being developed in another reality. Therefore, in underlined this one, they can be utilized far easier than you might suppose. When you exercise your right arm, your left arm benefits. When you develop abilities in one system, to some extent they are easier to develop in another. Parentheses, to me. In deciding to do some writing, parentheses, for the Seth books, as an example, you are also drawing upon abilities that you have worked on in another system, and through your intent, you are to a certain extent blending probabilities. Footnote. Seth's description of how I'm blending two probable selves reminded me of his material on the way Jane is doing the same thing. See the 680th session at 11:02. It can hardly be coincidental that Jane and I are using our individual writing abilities as the cohesive, the quote-unquote glue, to unite our respective sets of probable selves. End of footnote. Even a simple understanding of this would help people realize that no existence is dead-ended. Now give us a moment for our friend. Pause at 11:36. Seth came through with a page or so of material for Jane, then wound up the session at 11:48 p.m. I'd say that Seth's information after 11:29 implies at least a partial answer to the questions Jane asked at break. And tonight, just as she had following last Monday's session, Jane realized that she was actively delivering material on probabilities both in the sleep state and while partially awake. All right, so that concludes that session. Next up will be session 683, which we shall get to next time. So I think here is my plan, and this is perfect timing, 2:53, since I need to go make and eat lunch in 7 minutes. Since this ended up being a fairly short stream, since I got started late, I'm going to come back after lunch and do another Seth stream today. Maybe another, I don't know, 2 sessions perhaps, maybe even 3. I'm not sure yet. But probably at least another hour or so of content for today, of Seth content, so that we get like a good amount of work in on that, because that's important to me, and thus therefore make up for what we missed on Monday. And then after that, I'll probably come back yet again and do some live tarot readings or something like that. So yeah, that's the plan. Jeez, my throat. That's the plan. Yes, that's the plan. So expect me back here in about 2 hours, I would say. Let's see. Finding this concept of probable self very empowering. I used to think of it as overwhelming. This is awesome. Can't wait to catch up on what I missed. Thanks. I'll try to tune in later. Yes. Yeah, it's very fascinating. To my understanding, from what I've read in the Seth material, and I guess some other sources, but mainly the Seth material, supposedly, theoretically, we have an infinite variety of probable selves, and we constantly interact with them. We can draw upon their abilities, their knowledge, their experience, and stuff like that. And I guess, like, to my understanding, the more we become aware of them, theoretically, the more we can actually draw upon their abilities, knowledge, experience, etc. So yeah, it's a really interesting concept, and how no system is closed, and there's this constant interplay and exchange of information, energy, etc. So I'm glad you're enjoying it, Liz. Catch up on what you missed. Yeah, actually, on that note, I think that, since this material for this book, I have not read before, unlike the other Seth books that we read and analyzed. I'm thinking I might even like replay these streams later to myself, just to make sure that I'm absorbing what Seth is saying so much, because reading it out loud helps while streaming, but it's like this is pretty complex stuff. Like, I would need to play it back and just listen to it like with my full attention to really let it sink in. So I may very well do that later. So the only other thing that I will show before I depart for lunch is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, the succulents that I have now. I can just show a picture of them that I took on my phone. It's the same picture as on my Twitter. But if for anyone curious of what's sitting in my window right next to me, pretty much just a few feet away from me at this time. Hang on, my phone's doing some weird stuff. Let me just show those right here. These are my new succulents. No, geez, it doesn't really want to show it very well, does it? Oh, there we go. Yes, 6 little succulents on my windowsill now. Gorgeous. I know, I agree. I think they're just so beautiful. I love them so much. Like, these plants, like, give me such happiness. They really, really do. And I've also been reading up on plants as a result of this. Like, it's been very fascinating, and I don't know, I won't get all into it right now, but I found some interesting stuff, man. Like, these plants in general, like, there's evidence that they communicate with each other, that they're aware on many different levels. They even apparently have neurotransmitters, which is bizarre because they don't have brains like we do. They have neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, and I think perhaps others. Like, basically, there's a lot of evidence that they're far more conscious than we humans typically think of them as. And of course, with my beliefs being what they are, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. So I love having them here. They purify the air, they help one focus, and I'm sure they're helping me focus better. They're great for your health. Any kind of nature that you can sort of bring to you, or a piece of nature like that, is great for your health. So I'm so excited to have them in my office room now. And I'm thinking over time, I'll probably get even more plants. I'll get like a grow light, and maybe I'll even, I don't know, maybe I'll fill this room with plants at some point, or at least have quite a few of them, because they're so good for you. And also another cool thing I read about them is and this goes for basically all plants, they humidify the air, and that actually helps us humans like not get sick as easily, because it like keeps our skin from getting dried out, and it keeps like our like sinuses and throats and all everything more moist and not get dried out as easily, so like less sore throats and less stuff like that. So like I am actually blown away, because I was doing this research last like day or two since getting these plants, because it's just so fascinating. I am blown away at not only the health benefits of having plants, but also just their magnificence, and all of this evidence that they communicate with each other, and they can communicate with us on some level, or understand us on some level. They're aware of their surroundings. Like I'm amazed. I can't wait to do even more research on it. Actually, maybe we'll do a stream on it. Ye gods. They're so cute. I agree. They're so cute. I can't wait to see how big they get. I don't know are they going to get big, or are they going to stay small? I don't know what to expect. Plants are amazing. They truly are. I agree completely. Crystals and plants have been a huge part of my personal healing, spiritual and physical. Oh, really? That's interesting. They've been a huge part of your personal healing. Yeah, that's another thing I thought of. Like so nature, of course, is so pure, positive, and non-resistant. That my theory about it is that it will essentially transmute any negative energy into positive energy, similar to the way that crystals will more or less do, and organite, which I have on my desk here. And so my theory is that just by having these plants here in my room and in my energy field, it's actually going to help transmute any negative energy perhaps within me into positive energy, and make it easier to be in like a more calm, relaxed state. In fact, oh boy, I said I wasn't going to get all into this, but here I go. It's like these plants I view as like little spiritual teachers, in fact, because I see them in their stillness, in their presence, in their beingness, in their being in the now-ness, and in their purely non-resistant state. And I try to emulate that, because I believe that plants, and also animals as well, by the way, but indeed plants have a lot of things figured out that we humans are sort of disconnected from in many cases. And so I don't know, I look at these plants, and their stillness, and I try to let them teach me. That's what I've been doing thus far, and it feels really good. Like I really love it. So yeah, I hear what you're saying about that, about the healing and stuff through plants and the crystals. Like I'm brings me so much joy to have them, and all that positivity and joy flowing through me, or flowing through anyone, is going to be good for someone. Also, hello there, Perv Cat. You're joining us right at the end of the stream, but don't worry, I'll be back in a couple hours. Yes, spiritual teachers for sure. Plants love crystals too, by the way. I put a piece of clear quartz with mine a while ago, and they're visibly healthier / happier for it. Ooh, that's interesting. Thank you for telling me that. I had no idea. Plants love crystals, huh? Well, it makes sense. It makes total sense, huh? Clear quartz. Yeah, I've heard clear quartz is like some of, I don't know, the best stuff you can get in terms of crystals, or I guess, I don't know, a lot of crystals are good. I don't know. I'm not an expert on crystals. But I might have to try that. Maybe get some more crystals and put some quartz in particular by them. Yeah, because quartz just amplifies whatever energy is focused into it, from what I have heard and read and observed. So, that's fascinating. Yeah, my only concern for mine is, see, succulents, they need very specific care. They are not like other plants. One of the biggest things about them is that you can't overwater them. In fact, they need to be watered in a very specific way. Like, basically, they need to, their soil needs to be allowed to dry out completely, and then they need to be watered like crazy in one watering. Then it has to dry out again. I don't know. I don't want to get it all into it right now, but they have to be watered in a specific way, which I know how to do. But what concerns me is that ideally they would get like many hours of direct sunlight a day, because they're basically like desert plants, more or less. I think most of, not all of them. Well, where I have them in my window, they're only going to get like a couple of hours of direct sunlight each day. So I'm hoping that's enough, but if not, fortunately, I could just buy a grow light, I read, and use that to supplement the amount of sunlight that they get. And they should be good to go with that. And grow lights, they're only like, $30 or something, which I don't know is a substantial amount of money, but it's, accomplishable for me. So I might get them one of those, and certainly probably by the winter time, because winter's here. They're really not going to be getting any sunlight in that window. They'll get, of course, daylight, and they get plenty of daylight, like indirect sunlight now, but they're not going to be getting any direct sunlight in that window in the winter months. That's for damn sure, because I know the patterns of the sun by now, of course. Let's see. Never can have too many crystals. Indeed. All good points. They are a bit particular. Yeah, they're interesting. Which, the only reason I got succulents is just because they came up when I searched on Amazon for indoor plants as like one of the best ones I could get. Like, I wasn't particularly trying to get succulents, but I saw them and I thought, okay, I really, really want them, so I'll get them. And I'm really glad I did. They're, bringing me so much joy. But so, all right, anyway, I'm going to go make me lunch. Then I'll come back later, again, in about 2 hours or so, with more Seth material. So thanks so much for being here. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, PervCat, for popping in. And hope to see you guys later. Bye for now.